to everyone who's been with us since the beginning. I hope that you have taken your census. If you have not, please make sure to talk to us. Sorry, that is accidentally X'd out. I forgot to X out the video. I apologize for that. To those who have been with us since the beginning, I ask that you please make sure you do take the census. If you have not taken it, please let me know and we can have a conversation about it and find out why you have not done it yet, and we can walk you through the process so that you can do it at your earliest convenience. So for those who are joining us now, I want to also remind you all that today we are having a virtual tour of the Palestine Museum, the Museum of Palestinian People with Nizar. And we're very excited to have you all joining us today. We do ask that if you can to show your faces, that would be great because it helps us personalize this experience. We actually had the pleasure of hosting Shara Nassar at PAC a couple of years ago when the Nakba Museum was just starting out as a traveling museum. We are very proud at how far they've come and the transformation that they've undergone to become the Museum of the Palestinian People. We're very happy to have Nizar with us today. Nizar is a trainer on leadership, negotiations, and advocacy with extensive experience across the Middle East and North Africa. He worked for 2 years at the Project on Middle East Democracy in DC, building the advocacy capacity of Arab civil society organizations, and before that directed the Palestinian delegation in Washington, DC between 2003 and 2008. He advised senior Palestinian leaders, including the President, the Prime Minister, and various ministries. Currently, Nizar teaches negotiations at George Washington's Elliott School of International Affairs and is involved in several nonviolence initiatives in Palestine, Israel, and the US. He is also a chair of the board of the Museum of Palestinian People in Washington, D.C. Without further ado, the floor is yours. Nizar, please go ahead. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Rania. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Happy Ramadan for those observing it. And thank you for coming today and for showing up. I'm very excited to talk about the museum. I'm 45 years old and I work in all sorts of advocacy and government positions, but literally the Museum of Palestinian People is the project I'm most excited about. And mostly because I feel it's time and it's an opportunity for us to really overhaul the conversation about around Palestine and Palestinians. We have been othered for too long. We have been reduced to a single story for too long. And now is our opportunity to show the world how rich our culture is and how beautiful our people are, but also engage in that universal conversation. We opened the museum precisely because we want the Palestinians to be part of the universal conversation, to tell our story, the things that are important to us, how we see the world and what experiences we've had, and how we see ourselves in the world, in order to have a conversation with the rest of the peoples, right, and be able to be part and mainstream of this world. So we like to say it is less presentation and more conversation. We want to see those intersections with African Americans and Native Americans and with European Americans, like all of these stories of refugees who came from different countries, or the stories of Native Americans and their quest to protect their identity and their heritage. So that's one thing I wanted to share. The other is the importance of, again, like I'm a person who worked in advocacy, worked in an NGO sector, and then worked in government, and then worked in diplomacy. And what I've learned is that the best thing we can do for Palestine is just be very good citizens. People start getting interested in Palestine and the Palestinian cause once they care, and they won't care if they don't have a personal relationship with you. So that's, if I can encapsulate the lesson from the museum, is that we need to touch people's hearts. Early on, as we were, as Rania said, it was a traveling exhibit, and then we got donated the space, in fact, in DC. The family, and they're American, they're not even Palestinian, the family. They were so taken by our exhibit in Manhattan, they said, listen guys, we have this space in DC, and you can have it 2 years free of rent. So it's that the fact that what we're doing is touching people's hearts, and we're getting so much in-kind donations that is really touching. And another example is, again, while we were refurbishing the space in order to make it into a museum, we received this $5,000 donation from a guy called Jeff. And I looked at the name, I didn't recognize him. I asked Shara, I asked Fakhra, do you know this guy? And none of us knew him. We wanted to thank him. And we had no idea how he got in contact with us. And it turns out he's, again, white American, has nothing to do with Palestine, but he has a Palestinian neighbor, and he loves his neighbor because his neighbor is such a nice guy. And when he learned that found online that there was this museum, he just gave $5,000, right? So again, like that's what we're trying to evoke in this museum, to try to touch people's hearts, have them see the connection they have with us as human beings, and see that ultimately we are all one human race. And if some of us are not free, then all of us are not free. If some of us are not safe, none of us are safe. But to get there, we need to have that personal connection. So what we try to do in this space is to try to have exhibits and activities that speak to people's hearts, that people can connect to from wherever they are, right? Because each one of us looks at things from their perspective, and wanted to make this space a space where each person, each visitor has some sort of connection, connects at some point, and then from there we start a conversation, and then they start getting interested in Palestine. The goal is not to answer all questions. On the contrary, we want people to come in and come out with more questions, become more curious about Palestine and Palestinians, want to eat Palestinian food, want to visit Palestine, want to be friends with Palestinians, join Palestinian activities, and so on and so forth. So without further ado, and now I'm assuming since for your group, I don't need to go into too much history, because of course a lot of you already know this stuff. So I'm gonna walk you through the thought process that went into the museum. Of course, we tailor our tours depending on the group that's coming. And here my purpose is exactly to try to evoke your connection to the museum and what we're trying to do. Because we also want to have you see this as your museum, that you become ambassadors, that you send us your stories, your ideas, your activities. And if we can have 50 museums, that's even better, because we really think that that's what's going to change the conversation around Palestine. So I believe Rania sent you the link to the virtual tour. I'm going to share my screen, but it also would be useful for those of you that can to open that link to the virtual tour on another browser, just so that you can, tinker around and see what I'm doing as I'm talking about those different artifacts. So here I share my screen, and I'm going to share this. So if you go to the link, I'm going to just lower this. Can you just confirm that everybody can see my screen? Yes? Okay, good. Good, excellent. So when you go there, this tab is the tour. There are 4 more tabs: the permanent collection, the arts of Palestinian women, which is the current exhibit, making their mark, famous Palestinians who had a mark in the world, and a map of where are Palestinians today. We can talk about them later on, but we are in the tour map, tour tab, sorry. This is the door to the museum. You go in, and of course there is the reception, somebody who's receiving you, welcoming you. Here are the donors, the list of donors at different levels. And we start, let me just go back a bit, a remarkable people. One of the things we wanted to start with is, since our theory of change is that Palestinians have been reduced to a single story, to either violent people or victims, we think both stories are not good because they reduce us into one thing, into a news item, and we want to break out of this. So what we wanted to say is that, no, we are very old people and very modern people. We hail from very far back, and this first eye, the dots, the eye dots are, you can click on them and you get more information, and sometimes there is also audio. in this case, I'm clicking on the Nabatean vase, donated by the Mahani family, is like over 2,000 years old. Part of the Nabatean culture was in Palestine, and Palestinians were part of that. So we go that far. And at the same time, you have modern pictures here, there, and also here you have pottery work to show that there are, we go very far back, and we do modern things as well, that we spend. We're not a forgotten people that exist in the past and no longer exist. And we're not a new people that only showed up a few decades ago. And here, of course, the green glass is from Hebron. Again, Palestinian artifact. You can listen to the description when you hit play here. And the other item I wanted to show is this National Geographic map. Before I click on it, I'm going to come close and have you in the chat type in, what do you notice? Let me try this. No, that's not big enough. I thought I could make it bigger, but I can't. Okay. Rania, can you tell me what people saw? Can you read it to me, please?
We haven't got any messages yet.
Okay. So first is, of course, Bible lands, right? So the cartography, this is a National Geographic map made in 1938, and they call it Bible land, right? So clearly now you see how the cartographer is producing this map for a specific purpose. They have customers, they have readers, and he's thinking of their readers and putting Bible lands because he thinks this is what they're looking for. And indeed, if we went closer, it goes cradle of Western civilization. And then it shows specific holy sites and actual events that happened in the Bible, in the Old Testament and the New Testament. So clearly the cartographer made this map to address the demands or the needs or the demand of a certain population that's not Palestinian, right? So that's just one example of how the Palestinian story has been told by others. And the Palestine people know is a Palestine that's been narrated by so many others that have nothing to do with Palestine, right? So that's one of the biggest hurdles or biggest challenges that we have as Palestinians, is that others are telling our story. And similarly here on the right, you have a National Geographic magazine of 1914 that is going into the Holy Land and looking at the different aspects of life there. But even there, right, again, the writer, the producer of the research is looking for something specific. He has an idea of what the Holy Land needs to look like or should look like. When he didn't find it, he made sure to choreograph it. So you see pictures of Bedouins, people living in tents, sparse populations, maybe some rural areas with some harvesting and some agriculture, but rarely any pictures of cities. When there were very many cities in 1914 that were bustling, and you had a lot of bustling activity and clubs. If I go back here, and of course in the museum, you would have an iPad where you could scroll through the pages of the magazine to see how they're depicting Palestinians in National Geographic. And here we have pictures of life in Palestine around the 1900s to show the contrast between what National Geographic shows, that magazine in 1914, and what life was like. You had a women's group, you had merchants, you had all sorts of activities that are not covered. So whoever reads that 1914 National Geographic has no idea of the modernity and the richness and the complexity of life in Palestine. They just think, oh, it's just a group of Bedouins and some farmers here and there. It's pristine, it's native, it's indigenous, right? And finally, what I wanted to show, we don't need to go into too much detail in it, but this is a map we produced showing where Palestinians are today in different places. You can go look at it more specifically at this tab, Maps, where are Palestinians today? And you can look at the numbers and the geography of it. It's really very interesting. And you can also, you can see here there's a square that is scannable. You can go to further resources to look at the lives of Palestinians and the distribution of Palestinians. Again, to show that half of our population lives in Palestine, and the other half, in fact, more than half of us live outside of Palestine. And that connects to our story of Nakba and the diaspora and how connected we are. We continue to be connected, third, fourth generation of Palestinians that are still connected to their homeland despite our diaspora. Here we have a collection of items, British mandate passports, again to show that there was a country called Palestine with actual passports, that both Arabs and Jews had this passport. And then also IDs, police IDs. And here you have a marriage certificate. Then, so that's the marriage certificate of Hanna and Nabiha Sa. And they were married in 1934, but the document is dated 1961, I believe. I can't see it here. No, 1964. Again, to show how these people, like how us as Palestinians, everybody thinks like a birth certificate or a marriage certificate is, you know, just something you always get. But for Palestinians, those documentations are very important, and we lost them in 1948, so we had to produce other ones, and we had to produce them in Jordan because we couldn't access Palestine, and so on and so forth. So basic things that people take for granted in the US or in other places of like your official documentation, proof that you exist, proof that you are married to this woman, is a chore, and it's often a challenge for Palestinians, especially when we're going from one jurisdiction to another, how the names are typed in different ways, kind of like what you see in Ellis Island. The Palestinians have had that experience too, right? So when you see those documents, you have Nabiha and Suad, where are we? Hanna and Nabiha married. They give birth to Suad. Again, Suad gets born in 1936, but her document is produced 1961. Again, because she was born before Nakba, and then after Nakba, we lost our papers and we had to produce others. And then Suad gets married to a Palestinian who's living in Detroit, Michigan, and her name is spelled differently, right? So try proving that this is the same Suad who's the daughter of Hanna and Nabiha. Again, other people take these things for granted. For Palestinians, documentation of our identities, you know, who's my family, my name is a chore and is a challenge, and sometimes we lose them. In this section, we cover very quickly again the creation or like the engagement with Zionism, the partition plan, and the creation of the state of Israel, and the Nakba, and the consequence of the Nakba. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but again, the idea here is to have the visitor, especially one of the things that we were thinking is that we're going to have all sorts of visitors. Palestinians who already know the story, of course, and people who know nothing about Palestinians and just came, and we actually do often have that. Luckily, our location is very centered, it's a very nice neighborhood. So many people just pass by and are completely intrigued that there is something like this, so they come up, and it's literally their first time learning about Palestinians. So we tried as much as possible in this small space to put key things about the Palestinian experience that we think are important for a visitor to learn about in order to understand what it is like to be Palestinian and what are the things that show up for Palestinians in their lives, right? So here we show that early on, the Palestinians resisted the Zionist movement, and we saw the British occupation, the British mandate as the problem, that they were enabling the Zionists. So there was a lot of resistance to the British themselves. And here there's a small picture of the early Israeli camps, settlements, and how they looked like. Very quickly, again, we show the partition plan, and then even Arabs in Cairo were demonstrating against the partition plan, so it was not popular across the region. We show how the Zionist militias were also fighting the British, so the complexity of the story. And more importantly, this lower map, I'll try to zoom in, oops. Basically, if it's, when you go closer, you see that we're showing the flight of Palestinians from rural areas and from urban areas. And what we're trying to show is, and that's why it's before these sets of pictures, is that what happened in 1948 is in fact that the Palestinian society got shattered, right? You had people from cities, people from villages ending up in the same refugee camp. The whole social structure got decimated and had to be rebuilt all over again in these destitute camps where there wasn't running water and so on and so forth. But more importantly, just the social fabric that got completely decimated. And we had to build it all over again. So yes, we suffered a lot and our society got fragmented, but as we'll see in the next panel, we learned how to stay cohesive, figure out ways to recreate our existence and our presence in the world, and find new ways of Palestinian expression. So that takes us to gallery 2, which we can go, oops, here. This is the second gallery, which is in the middle. We start here. Oops. So you turn around and you come through where this water fountain is. And we talk about Handala, about the women's movement, about the youth movement. The GUPS is the General Union of Palestinian Students. And of course, the key, right? That's the key is key for Palestinians, right? So in this panel, we're trying to show how Palestinians are trying to, after what happened to us in 1948, we're trying to regroup, we're trying to find ways to reconnect to Palestine and connect to all sorts of struggles, right? So we saw the women's rights struggle as also part of the Palestinian struggle. The old generation is passing on the key to the young generation. And like this poster of GUPS that struggle for our rights is still young. And of course, we discussed Handala, what Handala means, and the symbolism of Handala, and how we don't want to turn our backs to Palestine. In this panel, we look at the examples of the occupation. What is the occupation currently like? What is it, its challenges? Of course, the checkpoints, the tree uprooting, the wall. But we also show the Palestinian political maturation, right? And the evolution of the Palestinian political thought. In this poster, we're showing how in the 1960s, while we were fighting for the liberation of Palestine in the 1960s, the Palestinian Liberation Organization suggested the creation of a national democratic state where Christians, Muslims, and Jews would have equal rights, that it would be a secular state. And the symbol for that project was the 1917 coin that had Palestine written in Arabic, English, and Hebrew. So again, we show this as an example of the evolution of Palestinian thought. Palestinians didn't get stuck in an event that happened in the past. They reacted to it, they engaged it, and they evolved from it, and that was one of the manifestations. Another key manifestation on the other side is the cultural element. What are things that Palestinians did in order to preserve their identity, preserve their culture, preserve their heritage? The classical though, right, the Palestinian embroidered dress, and keeping that skill of embroidery, but also repurposing it for newer stuff like the wall hanging or the purses and bookmarks that we created to repurpose that old tradition for new uses, right? So that creativity in the Palestinians to think of new ways of expressing our Palestinianhood, so that we are relevant to the present. Here, of course, some of you might recognize some of the motifs of those embroidered dresses. Here, for example, we're from Allah, and so on and so forth. So one of the cute things that happens in the museum is that when people come here, some of them actually recognize their villages' embroidered dresses. Very quickly, here you have more pictures of how Palestinians are a resilient people. Yes, there is the occupation and there are those difficulties and the wars, but they continue to exist. They continue to find new ways to stand up. So here you have, of course, the importance of education, how the Palestinians are one of the more educated Arab populations with the highest numbers of PhDs. Here you have this little girl. This is Nahr al-Barid refugee camp. Some of you might not know, but Nahr al-Barid refugee camp is in the north of Lebanon. And in, I believe, 2009 or 2008, maybe, there were terrorists that hid in the camp. And unfortunately, the Lebanese army decimated the camp because they were after those terrorists. And the camp was destroyed because of that. And many Palestinians died, innocent Palestinians died. And yet you see this girl, she's on a swing, she's smiling when her house behind her is riddled with bullets, right? So again, an exhibit of the Palestinian resilience and Palestinian, refusal to die. And the last example of that is, of course, I don't have a closer picture of it, but if you can see here, those three boys are watching a music show. This is in Gaza. It was the music conservatory in Gaza that got destroyed by the Israelis in 2012. Right the next day, the musicians of that conservatory made a concert on top of the rubble. That is, again, you might destroy the place, we still refuse to die. Other examples, here you would have an iPad that shows different stories. The story of Shara's family, the Nassar, that have their land in Bethlehem was going to be confiscated, had an order of confiscation back in the 90s, and how they resorted to nonviolence. And I have been in Israeli courts for the last 30 years battling to protect their land. And you have the story of other villages that have resisted, in the south, in the Naqab, you have many villages, Bedouin villages, Palestinian Bedouin villages that Israel doesn't recognize, and they get destroyed. So we talk about Araqib village that got destroyed over 130 times, and they built it again. So we have interviews with them. And we have here also a musician that's famous, that's also a refugee. So that's gallery 2. So in this backdrop of the difficulties we faced and the challenges we had and the adversity we faced, and yet here we have making their mark, which is from all this challenge, with all this adversity, yet Palestinians excel in all sorts of fields. So you have Walid Khaldi, the famous researcher. You have Ibrahim Jabra, who's famous for actually making the best translations of Shakespeare. Najil Ali for sure, Reem al-Banna, Farouk Shami, Mo Amr, of course, Mahmoud Darwish. You have Rashida Tlaib, and you have Justin Ammash, a Tea Party Palestinian Republican, and Rashida Tlaib, super left Palestinian American Democrat, right? Like we span the spectrum. One of the funny things that happens here is that especially when people come with families, so the parents go, "Oh, Edward Said," and the kids go, "Edward who?" And then the young folks see DJ Khaled and go, "Oh, DJ Khaled," and the parents go, "DJ who?" So it's kind of like, again, we like showing it because it shows all sorts of Palestinians in different aspects of life, having done all sorts of amazing things. Again, the message here is a message of hope, that from all of this, and of course, Maysoon Zayed, right? Maysoon Zayed, Mo Amr, Layla, of course, she's famous for the Gaza Kitchen. So trying to show how with all that adversity we survived. Not only did we survive, we thrived and we make our mark in the world. So it is a message of hope for all of those people who feel like downtrodden or feel like they have a lot of adversity. They get reinvigorated when they come to this museum. And that's what we want to do. We do not want people to feel sorry for us. We want them to admire us. We want them to have hope in this world that, yes, even the Palestinians that have been beaten down so many times still find a way to not only resist, but to thrive and to show how in this life there is what makes, on this earth, there is what makes life worth living, as our famous poet said. Finally, the last of the gallery is in fact art. So all what we have seen until now is part of what we call the permanent collection. That is the section of the museum that is orienting the visitor, giving them basic figures and pictures and stories that will help them absorb the art that they're going to be seeing afterwards. Because one of the things that we've learned when we did the traveling exhibit is that often when we exhibit Palestinian art, somebody who doesn't understand Palestine and Palestinians might not pay attention to the key, or not understand why is there a tent there, or why is an olive tree or something like that, right? So we thought in the permanent collection we'll put this stuff, or handala, right? We'll put all of these things so that when people come to the temporary exhibit, which is art by Palestinian artists or artists interested in Palestine, right? Who did pieces of art about Palestine, like Banksy. When we show that, we want to have people have had some context to make sense of what they're seeing. And the temporary exhibit is usually for 3, 4, or 5 months, depending on our programming capacity. You can look at these at your leisure. Again, that would be Art of Palestinian Women, that tab. And you can go learn about them. We're interested in like, we're not only interested in their art, we're interested in the story behind the art, right? So that's also the permanent collection. You can look at it more closely. Making their mark, you can read the stories of different Palestinians who have done all sorts of amazing things. And a map where are Palestinians today, which is the last tab, which is that map I showed you at the beginning. You can look at the data here and like click on what you want to look at, and so on and so forth. So I'll stop here and open it up for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Nazada. That was truly fascinating. I hope one day we can take everybody onto a trip to see the Museum of Palestinian People in person. I think that would be a great thing once this COVID crisis settles down. So at this time, if anyone has any questions, please put it in the chat box. I'll start off with what are some of your long-term plans for the museum?
So we, of course, would love to expand. We'd like to be bigger. But to be quite honest, when every time we sat and strategized, we thought we really want this to be a people's museum. So one of the key things that we thought of early on is that we do not want this to be a museum by elites for elites. So while a lot of people in our community pushed back and said, no, we should fundraise for $20 million or $50 million to build this big structure in the mall and have all sorts of things in it, we thought, you know what, no, let's start small, fail early and fail often, and learn the lessons. So, so that we learn two things. First, how do we engage our community to provide us with their stories and make this space really the community space to express their Palestinianhood, right? And at the same time, what are things that are working? What are visitors liking? What are activities that for which there is demand? And let's do more of those. And the things that are not having demand or people are not interested in, let's stop doing, right? So it's kind of like a startup. So our plan is to keep experimenting in this space, doing different activities. We do like Tatrizanti, that is, we have a famous Palestinian young woman who teaches how to do the embroidery. She does it, and the women or the people actually, we had men as well learn how to do the embroidery and then have conversations around the story behind embroidery. What does embroidery mean to you, and so on and so forth. We have cooking sessions. We have a famous place called Zayt and Za'atar. Very beautiful family, the Dubbani family. They're very cute. They have a beautiful story. I highly recommend you listen to Palestinians podcast. It's a website that takes Palestinian stories, and look at the Dubbani family story. It's beautiful. So they do. They come and they put their stalls in front of the museum, and they do Zayt and Za'atar. So people just walk by, have some Zayt and Za'atar, and then walk into the museum. So we're planning to do more of those activities. The other thing that we're doing is, as I mentioned before, we're interested in the intersectionality, right? How does our story intersect with the African American, Native American story? So we're doing partnerships. We've partnered with the Mosaic Theater. We've partnered with, of course, the Institute for Palestine Studies. So for example, we had an African American, he came to help us in the management. He coached us on management. And when he saw the exhibit, when he saw the pictures of occupation, he said, you know what? I'm from Detroit, and this reminds me of Detroit. So it's those connections. We're looking at those connections and doing things with others to see how we can connect the Palestinian story to somebody else's story, right? Because we want to be, we're basically mainstreaming Palestine. So for example, we have, what's her name? You might know her actually, Yasmin Mjalli, Baby Fist, not your Habibti.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. So we're engaging her to see how we can have an exhibit with her about, sexual harassment, and this is how it occurs in Palestine, and this is what Palestinians are doing about it, right? So it's all about those ways in which we connect to the larger story. So we're looking at those activities. Hopefully, maybe in 10 years' time, we will be able to, I know I spoke long, but basically what I'm saying is that all of these activities we're doing to see, does it make sense to have 50 museums in 50 locations, or does it make more sense to do like 90% of our work online? In the end, our objective is impact. Whatever has most impact, and again, the impact is nothing less than literally overhauling the conversation around Palestine and Palestinians. We're going to do that, and we're going to discover that as we try and error different things.
I'm truly in awe. This is amazing. I'm really excited to see how the museum is going to grow, because like I said in the beginning, I remember when the Nakba Museum was still a traveling museum and just with a couple of art pieces, and we hosted them at PAC. So I'm very excited for that. And on that note, in terms of Tatriz and tea, we actually have a workshop with that next week, next Tuesday. So we encourage everybody to please make sure that they join for our How to Do Tatriz workshop next Tuesday. So I have another follow-up question. And again, please, if anyone has any questions, put it into the chat. How was the reception of the museum? Have you received any pushback? Has it been positive? How have you dealt with the negative?
Very good. Yeah. Yes. Surprisingly, we got far less negative than we expected. Like we were bracing ourselves for like a deluge of criticism and anti-Semitism and what have you. And surprisingly, we didn't get much. We got a little bit, but not a lot. If you want, you can listen to our interview on the Kojo Namdi show. This is a famous show in DC on NPR. And we got interviewed there. And two of the people who called in were basically saying that this is anti-Semitic, what have you, and we responded to them. But that's about it. Like there was a guy who came in and said, I'm a proud Zionist. All my life, I've thought of you Palestinians as suicide bombers and terrorists, but this museum is forcing me to have a second look. So we're very happy with that because we feel like the museum is doing its work, which is it's getting people not to stay in that cerebral, cognitive, political position abstract, but really like seeing us as human beings, as people who have weddings, who love their children, who love food, who get frustrated, who get othered, like other people get othered and get frustrated with it, and are remarkable in the creative ways in which they express themselves in new ways. we try in our, if you want also do follow us on Facebook, we try to feature those Palestinian artists or those Palestinian activists that do something that is like creative. I'm not sure if you know, but another partner of ours is the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy, and they did a virtual reality visit of Palestine, basically as a reaction to Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar being denied entry to Palestine. What they did, they literally turned it into a virtual visit. That is, this is what Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar would have seen have they been allowed to come to Palestine. And then you have Na'lin or Bil'ain, and then you have Jerusalem, and then you have different places that they would have been. And then there's a narrator, somebody who's walking you through the place and talking about it. So they, before COVID, they were coming to DC and they were gonna share with us their VR masks. But we're still partnering with them, and we showcase them on our Facebook because we think that's that's one way in which people can experience Palestine, right? So, which is not the news, right? Because all what people get is just news, and we're always like, if you Google Palestine and Palestinians, it's always images of violence, right? But there you have a virtual trip where you are in the Ramallah market, you are in Jerusalem, you are in the field. So I highly recommend it.
Thank you very much. I definitely want to check that out. That sounds very fascinating. So you mentioned Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. Is there any initiative of kind of getting those quote unquote influencers involved in the museum to kind of spread awareness about the museum? You know, I only mentioned 2 people, but there's a lot of other Palestinian Americans or Arab Americans that are very passionate and vocal about Palestine. Is there any moves of trying to get them involved?
We do. We reach out to them. We reach out to their chiefs of staff to try to bring them. We try to bring them in for our activities, but they're very busy. And it just happens that for us, the activities often are we get more people coming if we do it over the weekend. And over the weekend, Rashid Tlaib goes back to her district. But we're still trying. We still believe. The other thing that is just as important to us is the community. We really want this to be the community space. We want your ideas. We want you to be involved. We genuinely do consider you our ambassadors. This is your museum. Whatever creative ways that you like to express your Palestinianhood, send it our way. Follow us on Facebook, ping us, and tell people about the space. Like we want this to grow organically. The main challenge for us is that the team is really very small. It's just 5 of us. And it's only Bshara and Becca that are salaried. Everybody else is literally volunteering. And then we contract the curator and the designer and so on. So definitely we could use fundraising, but also to grow our team.
Yeah, definitely. And on that note, Ra'ed asks, can we add more to the museum family trees from the early 1900s and connect them with the same families that live today in the US to keep our family trees connected between the past and the future?
That's an excellent idea. Yes, if we can, I love the idea. We can do it into a project, and maybe we can do it online because the space in the museum is very limited. But I love the idea. Yeah, let's email me and let's talk about how we can make this happen.
So on that note, because Ra'ed is one of the board members for the Palestinian American Community Center, how do you see other organizations like our organization and other community-based organizations partnering with the Museum of the Palestinian People? And you know, if you can speak more about the idea of kind of having different campuses of the same idea, so having it in different places across the country.
Yeah, so one thing we realize is that we really benefit from delocalizing, right? So we helped, there's in San Diego, there is the Palestine House. We help them create. They know their folks in San Diego, they know what San Diegans like, you know, and we can just help them in how to register as a 501c3, how we do things, what we included, connect them to our network, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, they're going to direct it. The Ramallah Federation approached us for programming for their kids, but also they were thinking of doing an exhibit of the Ramallah heritage and we're working together on how we can together do it. If we had, like, the original idea was that the Ramallah Federation would have a wing in the big museum, but then we opted not, like, that was very expensive and we weren't there yet. But we're definitely partnering with other organizations to find out how we best address each other's interests. We don't have a fixed way of partnering, but we do have values. Our values are co-authorship, inclusivity. We want to include everyone, and genuinely trying to focus on the resilience and the renewal in the Palestinian story, as opposed to just focusing on the challenges that we face. Yes, we face challenges, but let's not stop there, because unfortunately, what we found, a lot in our community wanted this museum to be more about bashing Israel and how horrible Israel is, and we argue back with them, this is not about Israel, this is about us. We need to tell our story independent of Israel, and that's kind of why we moved from Nakba Museum to Museum of the Palestinian People, because there is more to us than just that one event. And many times the Israelis, in fact, or the Zionists, use the Nakba against us and say, oh, Palestinians didn't exist before 1948. And that's such one of the key ways in which Zionists, and even evangelicals, they don't need to be Jewish Zionists, utilize when Gingrich said there is no such thing as Palestinian people. These are an invented people. So that's why we're focused on the resilience, the phoenix aspect of the Palestinians, and how we can tell that. So we're looking for like-minded organizations that are trying to do a positive, forceful, forward-looking story.
Absolutely, and that's honestly very admirable. I think that's exactly, the path that we should take. I remember we went to Palestine this past summer, and we had a conversation with Ahad Tamimi's father, and he actually said the same thing, where he was saying that we fall into the problem of victimhood, and we keep focusing on us being oppressed and human rights and all this stuff, which is all very important, but we forget the essence of who we are as Palestinian people, and that we have to maintain that narrative and speak to that narrative, because that narrative will overcome any other narrative. So I highly applaud the work that you guys are doing, and I think there's a lot of room for partnership between the Palestinian American Community Center and the Museum for Palestinian People. Because
what I want to add there, it's what Ahad's father said is very important. In fact, her cousin is one of the people that are in the PIPD's virtual Palestine app. You see her, she shows you around. So what he said is very important, because what we want to do in this space is, because we've had this argument, people were telling us, oh, you need to show the human rights, you need to show international law. I told them, why would anybody be interested in this information? Before they are interested, they need to care. And they're not gonna care until they see their personal connection to our story. So first, we need to make them care. We want people to watch this, go into the space, admire the Palestinians and be amazed at what Palestinians have managed to do, and be outraged at how Palestinians are being treated. Then they will be interested in learning more, because now they have the fire. We want to ignite that fire in them, and we want them to start caring. And they won't care unless they have that personal connection. And that's why our docents tell part of their personal story as they're showing people around, because we want people to connect to people. Because I can argue with you history and facts as much as you want, but I cannot challenge your story. Your story is what actually happened. Right? You can't tell me this didn't happen. No, it happened to my grandmother. I know, right? You can't tell me it didn't happen. Sorry, I get animated and excited.
No, but you're absolutely correct. I think that's what's important, is that we forget the base of the argument, which is that Palestinians as a people do not exist. And if we refute that argument through our stories, through our presence, then all the other arguments can be refuted as well. But if you're not refuting the base argument, then you essentially will not be able to successfully refute all the other arguments to people who are convinced of otherwise. So I really want to thank the Museum of Palestinian People. I want to thank you, Nizad, for your time. It was a very, very informational tour. Again, like I said, I hope that one day we're able to hold an actual tour in the location. And I encourage all of our viewers, both on Facebook and on Zoom, to make sure to support the Museum of the Palestinian People. They do have a weekly newsletter that they send out. This is their website that I sent on the link. I highly recommend that you all do definitely support them in any way that you can. And with that, I would like to end the event and remind you all to please make sure to take the census at your earliest convenience. We challenge you to do it because, again, remember, we are Palestinian, we are Arab, and we're proud, and we have to make sure that people know that and that we count. And we want you to take it. We also challenge you to get 5 other people to take the census as well. These webinars are brought to you by PAC. Don't forget to see a full list of our upcoming events and to donate to keep these programs going by visiting www.paccusa.org. We hope to see you in our future webinars. Remember, next week we have our digital launch for Palestine, our literary publication. If you liked anything you saw, please make sure to support and donate what you can at www.paccusa.org/donate-now. Thank you very much. And with that, I bid you all a great night.